to marry comfortably, rather than work, but needs must, and... A bang from the door knocker cut off her thoughts. Thea frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone, and it was late for someone to be calling. She shrugged out of the greatcoat and pinned her hair into a loose bun. Hastening upstairs, she was tempted to glide into the drawing room to identify the visitor via a glance through the side of the projecting bay window, but the knocker sounded again. Switching the hall light on, Thea paused at the door. A dark, heavy door without windows, of the sort that was common to the tall, white-painted terraces in Brighton's more pleasant streets, then opened it just enough to see outside. Familiarity stirred, then sharpened into recognition. "Mr. Ambrose." It was a formal way to address a stepbrother, but Stanley lived in America and Thea had only met him briefly before. That had been 2 years ago, when he'd called in 3 or 4 times while in England on a visit. She opened the door wider, shivering in the chill wind that raced along Clarendon Place after sweeping over the English Channel and across Marine Parade. "Come in." A big man in his 40s, he stepped into the hall. Thea closed the door, then led the way into the drawing room, switching the light on and pulling the curtains across the window. She gestured to the empty hearth and smiled apologetically. "I'm afraid you've caught me unprepared. If you wrote to me, the letter went astray." "I didn't write." "I didn't receive a telegram either, not since the one that instructed me to proceed with the funeral."
"I didn't send a telegram."
"I see." Thea hadn't warmed to her stepbrother the first time she'd met him, and she couldn't warm to him now. That first time he'd treated Thea and her mother as irrelevances in his world, sparing them barely a nod when he'd come to the house. Ever gracious, Cecily had invited him to stay, but he'd declined with a grunted "no," without even adding thanks. Instead, he'd slept elsewhere, but holed up with his father in the old book room to drink whiskey during the evenings. The room had stunk of it in the morning. It had stunk of Herbert and Stanley too, a combination of hair oil, breath mints and alcohol oozing through their pores. Thea had found it deeply unpleasant. She hoped Stanley wasn't expecting to stay now. He'd brought no luggage, but he could have left it at the station while he saw how the land lay. She hoped he wasn't expecting a meal either. Thea only had half a loaf, a little cheese and 4 eggs in the house. She should offer him tea, though. "Would you like a warming cup of—"
"No."
Goodness, he was difficult. "I'm sure you want to hear about the funeral, however." It hadn't been well attended. Herbert had lived his life separately from Thea and her mother, treating their house as little more than a source of funds and a place to lay his head when he returned from who knew where, crashing about drunkenly in the small hours. Not knowing his cronies, Thea had spent money she could ill afford on an obituary in the newspaper, but only 5 people had come to the funeral. 3 old sots with bloodshot eyes and 2 bold, blousy women. None of Cecily's old friends had come, because shame over her second husband had kept Cecily isolated for years. On a brighter note, surely Stanley would offer to reimburse Thea the funeral costs now. "Several of your father's friends attended, and—"
"I'm here about his will."
Stanley's eyes were hard and unemotional. They were hooded eyes set in a fleshy face above a beefy neck. Thea acknowledged the change of subject with a nod. "I was intending to write to you about your father's things. I didn't know which of them you wanted to keep, so I've left his room untouched." If Stanley had travelled from America hoping for a substantial inheritance, he was going to be disappointed. His father had left very little behind, not even photographs of Stanley's late mother.
"I'm here about your mother's will, too."
Thea was surprised, then a little concerned. If Stanley thought he was a beneficiary of her mother's will, he was set for more disappointment. Cecily had left all her estate to Thea. What remained of it, that was. But perhaps he merely wished to be sure that everything had been done properly, so he could return to his own life without giving her further thought. "I haven't seen a solicitor about my mother's will yet, but I intend to do so soon," Thea told him. Herbert had fallen ill soon after her mother's death, and Thea had mostly been tied to the house. Then one day Herbert had grabbed her wrist and pulled her closer. Fighting her revulsion, Thea had allowed him to gasp in her ear.
"Your mother's will. Don't do anything."
assuming he feared she'd put him out on the streets.